So I saw Liana's video on basically Jim Sterling and how he didn't get a Final Fantasy copy, um, and apparently there was some big hubbub about whether people should be allowed to have that or whether Square Enix was squelching criticism, etc. So I wanted to talk specifically about something Liana said at the end of her video, where she asked consumers to let them know, those people who aren't at the top echelons or whatever of game journalists, what they needed to do in order to do their job and still communicate properly, and what they should do to avoid being called conspiracy, collusionists or corrupt people when they're just doing their job. So I wanted to talk about that, but first I do actually want to discuss what she actually talks about in her video, and that is, Jim Sterling and how he was reviewed he was denied a review copy of Final Fantasy XIV. So, as far as I know, the context behind this is that Jim Sterling got caught basically on one of the previous Final Fantasy games having not finished it, and given it only like 10 hours of gameplay before he, basically said, like, this game's shit, I don't like it. And, that would be fair if you're a consumer and that's all you cared about, but considering this is your job, and your job is to give a game a fair shake and see whether it's good at what it proposes to be good at and what it proposes to give to a consumer who wants that, right? That's your job. So Jim Sterling's job was to look at this game, which is Final Fantasy. And for those who don't know about Final Fantasy games are, first off, they're JRPGs, and that means it's a Japanese role-playing game. The only real difference is that Japanese role-playing games are pretty notorious for being very, very long, like overtly long. Like, everybody in the West who keeps saying, like, I like my games to be shorter, I don't need fluff, the people who make JRPGs and the people who like JRPGs would say, I don't know what you're talking about. I love that the game is incredibly long. And a lot of people would say, well, JRPGs are long, but that's because they're long, epic stories, and, I don't consider it fluff for them to be extremely long. And that's fair. And, but you have to know what kind of game you're reviewing, right? It's a JRPG. It's going to be long. So that's where we have to start off first. And then you have to realize that it's an RPG. So, sometimes it's going to be inherently about story, and particularly with Final Fantasy, that's the draw. The draw is not necessarily how well the game plays. The draw is mostly the story. And I say mostly, if the game doesn't work, then it's going to have a problem. But most people who play Final Fantasy are going to want a good story, right? So it would do you well to do your best to give the story a good chance to unfold, because that's where people are going to like the game or dislike the game as a Final Fantasy game. Sure, if it does play well, that's a problem. But, again, people may care more about the story, and probably will care more about the story if they're into a Final Fantasy game than, say, like Skyrim. Skyrim, most people, that game's exactly opposite. It's a Western RPG. People care less about the main story, for the most part. They want to, go goof around and do whatever they can do, and that's fair. But those same people, if they like Final Fantasy games, are not going to like Final Fantasy games for the same reason they like Skyrim games. So judging them the same way is going to be a problem. It's going to be a very big problem. So this is where I feel people who are defending what Jim Sterling did to the previous Square Enix game have gone a bit wry. So basically, when he only gave it, and this is all just what I know of the situation as it is. I didn't really look into it too badly, but from what I know, Jim Sterling only gave the game, 10 hours worth of gameplay, and he didn't finish the game. We're pretty sure he didn't finish the game. There's a bunch of people who looked at his achievements while they were public and said, like, he didn't get the achievement for finishing the game. And, oh, but he didn't sync his achievements, whatever. So it's thought that he didn't finish the game. It seems pretty clear that he didn't finish the game. And that has serious implications for the story, right? If you didn't finish the game, I as shitty as it may seem, like, well, I didn't want to finish the game because the game wasn't fun. Well, if the game, again, if most people are driving the funness of this game from its story, then I would think you would need to see all of the story elements of it, and that means, beginning, middle, and end. And apparently Jim Sterling, when he didn't finish this game, claimed to have seen all of those, and then people saw that he hadn't done that, which is another reason it sits badly. You probably shouldn't say you did it when you didn't do it. That makes it even worse. And again, this is all like, maybe he did and he just really never synced up his achievements, although I'm not sure why he would do that, even when people were critically looking at his achievements thinking, like, why hasn't he finished it? I would think he would sync it after that and be like, no, look, I did, I just didn't sync it in time. But in any case, we think he didn't do it, we feel like he didn't do it, and he says, or at least people say, that he only gave the game 10 hours. And, to illustrate why that doesn't work, again, JRPGs are very long. Sometimes it may take more time than other games. 10 hours in another game, 10 hours in Skyrim, and you're not enjoying it, you're right. You should probably put the game down because you're not going to enjoy it. But if you like JRPGs, the best part of the game may come after 10 hours. I mean, and for an example, and I'll even use the same franchise, the one everybody likes, so hopefully everybody can relate to this. Final Fantasy VII. I haven't played it in a really long time. I don't remember quite how long it took, but at some point in the game, and spoilers, the game is super old and it's been re-released too many times for me to feel bad about spoilers, but spoilers here. At some point, the main love interest of the game just fucking dies. She's dead. And then the protagonist goes into, like, this weird mood, and he's all, very, very... It gets very, like, existential, like, oh my god, he doesn't know what's going on, every twists and twans, and we don't know where the story's going, and M. Night Shyamalan must have done this, and all that. So everything gets all shook up. But that happens, like, pretty far. I wouldn't say it's super far in the game. It's about halfway through, I would say. I think it's about halfway through. And that game has, that game is 30 hours to play all the way through. So this is like 15 or 16 hours, possibly. Maybe if you could probably speedrun it or do it quickly. But if you're just casually playing this through, and depending on how much, because again, it's a JRPG, there's some grinding, there are levels, so you could spend 20 hours before you get to this point, or you could spend 16 hours, or you could spend 10 hours. One way or the other, it's about halfway through the game before all this happens, and I don't know about everybody else, but for me, this is the point where the game starts to get really, really interesting, because then that's where the story really picks up from being lame, the same old lame, like, I'm gonna go be a hero, to like, holy shit, what's happening? I don't know what's happening anymore. Help me. I don't know what's going on. So that's where the game becomes interesting for me. And I think a lot of people could sympathize with that. And again, if Jim had given a review, his unfair review to Final Fantasy VII, he never would have saw that. He probably would have just stopped and said, you know what, this is same old, lame old game that I've played before, because he quit at 10 hours. He never would have got there. He didn't finish it, he didn't figure out that the story actually gets very much different and more complicated. So I think that's really where, people said, like, of course Square Enix didn't give him another chance. He didn't give their game the chance it deserved. And a lot of people are saying, like, well, then games should be short, then they should focus on making short games. Well, that's not the crowd they're, marketing their games to. And, other people would then say, well, Jim isn't, making his opinions for that crowd. He's making the opinions for the crowd who have, who like what he likes. So the Westerners who do want short games. And there is some credence to that, but at the same time, there's a little bit of a bargain you make, an unwritten bargain you make with a game developer, someone who's put love and money and sweat into a game when they give you a review copy. Basically, it's not a bargain that says, like, you have to say good things about it. The bargain is, if you're going to say bad things about it, if you're going to attack, I wouldn't say attack, but if you're going to say bad things about it, it needs to be rightfully deserved, right? So if you're going to say bad things about a game, it needs to be because the game deserves those bad things, right? And since Final Fantasy is a JRPG, and its draw is the fact that it will be long and it will be story oriented, the fact that he didn't stick with those, as his profession. His profession is to give this game its fair shake. He didn't give it a fair shake because he didn't go past the 10-hour, didn't find the story aspects, and that's what this game shines at, right? Or at least it should shine at. I'm not sure. I don't even remember which Final Fantasy it was. They start to blur together. I don't remember if it did deserve it, but the principle of it is that he didn't give it a fair shake to shine through. He didn't give it a chance. I think it would be similar if you played the next Halo game and you went to do a review and you played the single player of the Halo game and you said, like, this is just the same old FPS shoot-'em-up story campaign. I'm not invested in it at all. And then you gave the game a shitty review and the publishers, got angry with you. And for good reason, too, because, the people who are looking to buy this game, the people who this game was made for, aren't necessarily looking for this, perfect this perfect single-player experience. They're more looking for a competitive is probably the wrong word, maybe competitive, but they're looking for a first-person shooter that you're gonna play on multiplayer, right? They're looking for the multiplayer experience. So the fact that if you were doing a review for Halo and you never even touched the multiplayer, it would be insulting. It would be just blatantly not giving it a fair shake. Since the game shines at multiplayer, that's where its strong points are. What you should really try very, very hard to stick through and play the multiplayer as much as possible. That should be the part where you give the game its due, right? If you didn't want to stick through the entire single player, fine. They didn't make it for single player. Halo was generally not made for single player, and we'd hope that you would give both a good try, and that way you would give your best impressions, having stuck through it and done work. Because remember, guys, at some point, yes, your job is to tell me whether the game is not fun, and if you're not having fun, then job over, right? But at the same time, it is your work, so maybe you not have you stick through the process of not having fun so that I can get the very best opinion. Like, there may be a glimpse of fun at the very end after hours of not having fun, and I should know about that glimpse of fun at the end, and you wouldn't know if you just quit and stopped. It's your job to find that out and tell me about it, and then I will decide, fuck it, I'm not going to go through hours of not fun to get that one little glimmer of fun, but your job is still to let me know that fun is there, right? That's your job. So, to some degree, we hope to go through that, but you should certainly go through it for the parts where the game, where the game is going to shine, or where it's supposed to shine. So for Halo multiplayer, you should really try for multiplayer. Like, even if the multiplayer seems shit right off the bat, you should really try to give it as much of a chance as you can, because that's where it should do well, right? That's where I'm interested to know if it's going to do well. And for Final Fantasy, you really should play through the entire story, and since it's a JRPG, you should really be patient about how long that is going to take, because, JRPGs, for those who like them, are going to take time to get to the part that's fun, and they know that, and they're okay with that. There's no buts about that. So, Jim didn't really give Square Enix, I don't even know if they're still called Square Enix, I'm going to keep calling them Square Enix, though. He didn't give them a fair deal on that one. And it's really no surprise to me that they would say, you know what, we know you're going to say bad things about our game, and now we know that you're not even going to give it its fair shot. So if you're going to say, if we're already going to have people probably say bad things about our game, we want the people who are at least going to give the game a shot to say bad things. If you're just going to say bad things, just unfairly, then fuck it. We don't want your opinion out there, and that's their right to do that. And you're saying, like, well, should they have that opinion? Well, they're perfectly allowed it. If there are bad things said about their game, it should be deservedly bad, right? If we want something to be said that is bad about a game, it should be because the game is bad, not because you just don't like that genre or whatever, right? That's where bias is coming in. Jim is putting his bias into this game where he's not giving a fair shot, and and they don't want him to give a biased review. If he's not going to give it its fair due, then why should they bother, hearing what he has to say? It's going to do harm to their consumers, to the people who are going to buy their game. And in the end, they are producers. They want their game to do well. Of course they're going to do that. Now, there is a line between, we want our game to do well, and therefore we're not going to give any review copies. Like, that's just squelching and trying to really screw over your consumers. We understand that you're going to try and embellish about how good your game is. We understand that. But we expect you to say something about it. We expect you not to completely, cut off the ability for us to gain knowledge about the product that we're going to purchase. So that's where I stand on the whole Jim Sterling thing. I didn't read what TB said. I think TB came at it from a ground that was saying, like, well, you shouldn't deny Jim Sterling because he said bad things about your game. And in that case, he's right. He's right. If you don't like what Jim Sterling's going to say about your game, you probably shouldn't just deny it to him. But I think in the context of why they don't like what Jim Sterling's saying, I think it's perfectly acceptable in this case. So I would slightly disagree with TB in this one, but sort of not. Yes and no. I didn't read exactly what TB said, so I'm completely going off hearsay at this point. So there's that. So more importantly, though, since I'm talking about Jim Sterling and the roles of a producer to push their product and where the lines get drawn, and people like Jim Sterling who are in the middle of that and the consumer, that's where I'd like to move on to what I really want to talk about really quick with what Liana said at the end of her video. At the end of her video, she said that people like her, who are not a Jim Sterling, who are not huge in the industry yet, need help. They need guidance to know how they can do their job and still be able to communicate without, people saying, look, they're colluding, they're working together to fuck us over, etc., etc. They need guidance. They need consumer help to tell us what do we have to do to make sure that you're okay with us and we can still do our job and communicate. And I think weirdly enough, she's answered her own question. A lot of people, there are always going to be some people who are going to say, like, oh, you're colluding, but, for the most part, the people you should care about, those people are going to care that you're already doing what you're doing. I think you answered somewhat your own question within your video. In that same video, at some point, she talks about how Ben Kuchera of Polygon, or Kotaku, one or the other, Ben Kuchera, basically. You all know Ben Kuchera. She talks about how Ben Kuchera was on good grounds with her before she voiced an opinion that he didn't agree with. Once he voiced an opinion that she didn't agree with, he cut ties with her, right? And that's exactly where it lies. If Liana had, when he started to cut ties, said, listen, I'll change my opinion to be what yours is, and coddle to him to keep that connection there, instead of voicing her opinion, which some of us would find very pertinent and important, that's where you go awry. What we want is, you have to remember the structure we have in this industry, and pretty much every industry that has a press, right, or the press is there. There's the consumer, that's me and you, anyone who's going to buy a product. There are the producers, those who produce their products, and then there's the middle layer, the press, basically. So the jobs of the consumer are to buy the products, do whatever you want, buy the products you want to buy because you want to buy them. But of course, we don't have infinite money. We can't just buy everything, so we have to decide what product we want to buy. And naturally, we want to get the best bang for our buck, right? We want to get the best product we can for the money that we're paying. Because, again, we don't have that much money, and we have to spend our money across multiple markets, right? I have to buy food, and I don't have to buy video games, but I want to buy video games. But I do have to buy food, so I have to decide between the two. Now, that's an oversimplification of it, basically. But you get it. You know what a freaking consumer is. Everybody knows what a consumer is. Come on. And then there's the producers, and they make the things that we buy. So this is Square Enix in the previous case. They make Final Fantasy that I will pay $60 for. And their job is to make the game good so that, obviously I will want to buy it naturally. But then their job as a producer is also to advocate for their own product, right? Their job is to embellish as best they can and get away with it, to say, listen, our game is way better than that game you were thinking about buying. Why buy Halo? You could buy Final Fantasy. So their job is obviously to do that. And we as consumers know that the producer who makes the game and is trying to sell it to us is doing that. We know that. That's our expectation. We know they're trying to do that. We accept that they're going to do that. And that's why we have to do our work to figure out, how much are they embellishing? We need to know the truth. How much is Final Fantasy really a better game than Halo? Is Final Fantasy going to be actually better for me than Halo? That's what we need to know. And, the reality of it is, as a consumer, it's an impossible task because you have to do it for every market, right? Again, we're always striving to get the best bang for our buck. So it's not like we're only focusing on video games and we never focus on scams in other markets, right? We have to be as educated as we can in everything we invest our money into. And that's where press comes in, right? Because press is essentially this middle layer that says, okay, here's what the producers are telling you consumers. Here's what they're telling us. Here's the truth. I've done the digging. I've done the work for you. Here's what I think. Here's what I think of their truth. Here's what I think about whether it's really right. That's where the value of the press comes in play as a job to help us consumers figure out what is right to buy and what is not right to buy. This should be all fairly simple. That's why the press gets paid in ad revenue, etc., because these consumers should be going en masse to go get their opinions from you and thus seeing the advertisements there, right? That's why you have value. That's where the value comes from. So if at any point, if you're part of the press, part of that little layer in between the producer and the consumer, if at any point you're sort of betraying the consumer, you've heard that a lot, but yeah, if at any point you're betraying the consumer for your friends or for anybody else in the industry, that's where we have, a problem. Because if you had coddled and changed your opinions for Ben Kuchera to say, like, I want to keep cozy with Ben Kuchera, so I didn't tell you the harsh reality of this game, well, I may have paid $60 for that game and figured out the hard way that you didn't tell me what I needed to know. How much value do you have to me then? Well, absolutely zero, right? But, you still got your job because you're indirectly paid, right? I don't directly pay you, and therefore I can't directly hurt you. You get indirectly hurt when you hurt your consumers. So it gets muddied. The response to you doing wrong gets muddied, and I think that's where a lot of this problem has come from. These people who write these things that are anti-consumer, they survive because it's an indirect way of hurting them, right? Right? They don't, you don't say something that's anti-consumer and immediately get this huge hit in money. You get a backlash, a public outlash, because people don't agree with it, but, your sponsors are still paying you and you're still getting the views for the time being. And that's why, these things can continue on, even though they probably shouldn't. So, how do you communicate with each other and still not be considered for collusion? Well, right now, when there's all this, there's a lot of tension right now, obviously, with Gamergate. So, right now, you're probably just going to have to take one for the team. And that sounds shitty, but that's the reality, is right now, even if you're not colluding, even if you're doing your job perfectly, there are going to be some people who are saying, oh, you're pulling favors, etc., etc. Because they're hypersensitive to it. We're all hypersensitive to bullshit right now because of Gamergate. And for the time being, you're going to have to deal with it, unfortunately. But in the long term, if you want to know what we as consumers really want from you, how to do this job, well, first off, you should ask yourself a pertinent question that I was thinking to myself when you said, well, we're not even allowed to communicate with other people anymore, and without being persecuted for collusion. I thought to myself immediately, why is it that you need to communicate with other journalists? Why does it matter what they think, right? I'm here for, your job is to give me your opinion, your consumer opinion of this. Why do you care what Ben Kuchera thinks of what your opinion is? That's not your job. Your job is not to care about what other journalists, friendly or non-friendly, may think about it. Your job is to give me, the consumer, your opinion of it, right? Whether they like it or not. That's where your onus lies. That's where your job duty lies. In the same way that someone who works as a public relations person for a producer or whatever, or a marketing sales agent for a producer, their job is not to tell you what the best product for you to buy is, right? They say that's their job. That's not actually their job, and we all know it. Their job is to push and convince you that the producer they work for, the product that they advocate for, is the best possible one for you to buy, even if it's not true. Even if it's not true, that's their job. That's where their duty lies. Their duty lies to the producer that they work for and the product that they sell. And we all know that, and thus it's not a problem that someone who makes Final Fantasy XIV tells me Final Fantasy XIV is the best RPG ever, right? I know it might not be true. I understand. And that's where your job lies. As the press, your job lies to me, the consumer. So your job is not to any product or to any person who says anything about a product. Your job is to me, is to the consumer, and what I need to know about it. So if other journalists, are not okay with your opinion, I don't care that they're not okay with your opinion, quite frankly. It's more important that you give me pertinent information about the game that I might be purchasing. And, a lot of people are going to say, well, but then why are people so harsh on those who would talk about, I'm going to call them feminist issues. Why are people so harsh on gender issues that are brought up in video games? Like, why are people so harsh about that? It's pertinent information. Why should we care? Well, I think it comes down to the fact that, really, a lot of us don't feel that gender issues are the most important part of product. I didn't buy Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball because I felt I was going to get a really strong message about equality. No, I bought it because it's a goofy game from the Ninja team and I enjoyed other Ninja titles, right? Does the game do goofy Ninja games, right? Ninja team games, I should say. If it does, then maybe I'm interested. Maybe I'm not. I don't know. That's an extreme example because we all know that Extreme Beach Volleyball is made to be laughable. It's made to be goofy, right? That's another thing. Like, if you're taking it too seriously and being like, well, the girls have bouncing boobs and they spent money on the boob fizzers. How fucking awful. It's like, nobody who is interested in buying that game, or ever will be interested in buying that game, cares, right? They're interested in the goofy aspect. And in that respect, the boob physics are goofy and somewhat funny. So, to that degree, yeah, the game actually does its purpose very well. So that's where I lie. It's not. We're sick of the like, I don't care what this game purports to do. I don't care why you would like this game. Here's what I think about it. Its portrayal of women. Like, for the most part, we don't care about its portrayal of women, unless it is a game that is saying, like, this is, unless its job is to communicate about women, or communicate about how we treat women, or if it's to be taken in a realist state, right? I always love when people talk about how women are treated unfairly in the Grand Theft Auto series, and it's like, it's Grand Theft fucking Auto. The game is about immorality, and, to a ridiculous degree, people literally running over citizens on the sidewalk just all the time, and, fighting the police off. Like, that doesn't happen in reality, and I would be very concerned if it did. So I'm not too concerned with the fact that people treat, NPCs of women in Grand Theft Auto badly. I'm not really concerned about it because they treat everybody badly, and it's not about treating people good. You've missed the point entirely. If I were looking for a game that treated people well, I wouldn't even think of Grand Theft Auto. Right? I wouldn't think of Grand Theft Auto at all because the title itself implies that it's immoral. It's Grand Theft Auto. It's stealing a lot. Stealing a car that costs a lot. It's a big crime. It's a felony. The game is named after a goddamn felony. Like, why would I, you know? It's sort of why you would push that angle. It's not useful to me as a consumer, and that's where your job is, to the consumer. So if it's not useful to me as a consumer, and that's your job, why are you doing it? You know, and it's okay to slip up every once in a while. It's okay to have your opinions every once in a while. It's fine. It's when it gets to the point where that's all you write about is like this, like, it doesn't treat women well. It promotes violence. And this is like, well, I know that that's not useful, and that's the 15th article you've written. That's all you write about is how it's fucking mean to women or mean to people in general, and it's violent. I don't care. None of that is pertinent to my purchasing decision, and you're utterly useless to me. And I think it would be okay if it were just a couple people, but we've obviously seen through Gamergate that, you know, there is the big sites are almost concocted of all people trying to do this. And people who would bother to say otherwise, people who would bother to say, well, yeah, it treats women well, but nobody cares. The people who would dare to say that have, you know, had problems with these blacklisting, this, like, clique mentality where people say, like, oh, he's not talking about how this and this and that, and he's saying that it's even irrelevant to talk about it in this game. Well, let's blacklist him. Let's not, don't let him publish on your site. Those are harmful opinions he's got. So, obviously, we're hypersensitive to that, and that is the reason why, is because you shouldn't care about what other journalists think. You should always be advocating for the consumer. When you stop advocating for a consumer, that's when you have problems, and it's a constant thing you have to check up on. You know, am I thinking about the consumer here when I press these opinions? Are my opinions something that a general consumer will have? If not, then maybe they're not pertinent. You know, and I think a lot of people have said it best is that, yeah, your opinions, sometimes your opinions are always important, and, you know, they should be there, but maybe they just shouldn't, you know, really, if you can understand that your opinions might not factor into everybody else's opinions, then you shouldn't factor those opinions into your score. It doesn't mean you shouldn't talk about them, but maybe you shouldn't judge the entire game on it, right? Make it a side note. I didn't include this in the score because I don't feel that everybody feels the same way that I do, but I do feel like I should mention X, Y, and Z about how they treat women or how it's violent, right? That's the important part. Make sure you're appealing the part that's pertinent to the review and has the score that is going to affect people's purchasing decisions. Make sure that is relevant to them, right? Make sure you're not trying to make them buy what you want to buy. Make sure they're going to buy what you think they want to buy. And you're doing the research for them, and you're helping to sort of scrape away the embellishment that the producers are obviously going to try and put on their products, right? You know, Final Fantasy, oh, it's the greatest RPG ever. Well, is it really? Let me dissect that and see if it really is the best and why you might want to buy it or might not want to buy it. That's your job as a journalist, to me, the consumer, so that I can look at that and be better learned. The word is escaping me. I can be better informed. There we go. I can be better informed about my purchasing decision of Final Fantasy XIV and whether I want to buy it. That's where you stand. That's where your job is. And that's what we want you, as consumers, we want you to never forget that, right? So, as far as Liana, as far as you're concerned, the fact that, you know, you managed to have your own opinion that you thought was pertinent and continued to have that opinion even though Ben Kuchera didn't like you anymore, right? The fact that you didn't bend over to that and say, well, my job is to make sure I'm still cozy with Ben Kuchera. You remembered where you lie is to have your own opinion. That's why people value your opinion. That's the only reason you're worth anything. If we just wanted Ben Kuchera's cozy opinion, we would have gone to Ben Kuchera, right? So basically, you answered your own question. As long as you can do what you do for consumers and keep yourself from censoring yourself or others because you want to stay cozy with them or somebody else in the industry, then you're doing just fine. You know, as long as the Ben Kucheras that pop up and say, like, if you don't like my opinion, I'm not going to like you anymore. As long as you say then, well, you know what, it's my job to do this, and I'm going to do it anyway, even though you don't like it. That's where you should lie. And as long as you can do that, you're doing just fine, right? And just be aware that the people who still are saying you're colluding, well, there's always going to be one or two that are still saying that, oh, you're colluding. And it's probably going to be exacerbated right now, specifically because of this whole Gamergate controversy and the feeling that the entire industry has sort of turned on consumers. And, you know, for good reason. It does feel like I was saying, people who had other opinions, if they did, would see these big guys like Ben Kuchera say, like, that's not my opinion and I don't like you anymore. And then they would say, like, no, wait, I'll change my opinion, or I'll make my opinion yours, or, you know, I won't think outside the box, and I'll make you happy. I think that's why we're all a little bit pissed and a little bit on edge about it. So it's exacerbated by that. There's always going to be some people who say that you're colluding, but in general, Liana, if you're okay with pissing off a Ben Kuchera here or there, and continuing to advocate for the people that you feel are going to value your opinion, and you're not bending your opinion to anybody's will, then you're doing a good job, and keep doing it.
Unconscious!